Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions presentation. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of notes for our participants today. All of you are on mute, but we absolutely want to address any questions that you have. So we ask that you please use the question portion of the dashboard. We'll address questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not our presentation will be made available after we're done. We do make our presentations available in two ways. If you'd like to get your hands on a copy of the slides, those will be available for download from our website. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar with the voiceover, we do post all of our webinar recordings to our YouTube page. And that can also be found linked on the pjr.com website. Our topics for today, we're going to explain what is meant by the term non-applicable clause and kind of unpack that in terms of certification. We're going to look at where the requirements pertaining to this requirement come from, some of the higher level requirements. We're going to look at a concept known as outsourcing. This is a very key concept now in terms of non-applicable clauses. We'll have a look very briefly at some historical aspects of this that were brought on by the 2008 version of ISO 9001. And we'll bring things up to date by looking at outsourcing within ISO 9001:2015, a couple of points on limited scope impact, and then your questions. Now, for today's presentation, we're going to be exploring these concepts as they are addressed in ISO 9001:2015. Now, these concepts appear in other standards, AS 9100, IATF 16949, and what have you. But there are applicable sector-specific requirements in many cases. Now, we do have other webinars on these standards and many other standards. So I do invite you to visit our website for further information if you are an aerospace manufacturer, an automotive manufacturer, etc. So, the concept of non-applicable clauses, it comes from section 4.3 of ISO 9001:2015. And the verbiage it's been provided on screen here. It states that when you develop your scope statement, your scope, of course, being the official declaration of what you're getting certified for, it shall indicate the types of products and services covered, and then provide justification for any requirement of this international standard, in other words, ISO 9001 itself, that the organization has determined to be not applicable to the scope of the quality management system. Now, 4.3 goes on to mandate that your scope and the non-applicable clause details need to be maintained as documented information. In other words, you need to have it declared. You know, sometimes companies will have a quality manual. Sometimes there'll be an official scope statement document. The format of it is up to you, of course, but it needs to be established in writing somewhere. Now, for our presentation today, we're going to be referring to non-applicable clauses as exemptions. This is more just for ease of the presentation, but the official term is still non-applicable clauses. So for an exemption to be justified, the basic understanding is it has to be something that is not part of your quality management system as defined by the scope. So let's dig in a little and try to get a better sense of understanding that requirement. And we're going to begin by exploring the high-level requirements that we'll be using throughout our presentation today. We're going to start with feedback from the TC 176 committee. These are the folks that wrote ISO 9001, both its current version and its predecessor, the 2008 revision. We're going to be bringing in items from the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group. This is a joint task force, if you will, representing both the ISO and the IAF. We're going to be pointing out content from ISO 9001 itself, both the auditable content and guidance content. And I'm also in a couple of places going to be dropping in some content from the ISO 9002. This is the guidance standard that was published in 2016 as an accompaniment to ISO 9001 2015. So let's begin with the TC 176 committee position papers. Now these are more historical than anything else at this point. Way back in October 2008, shortly after ISO 9001-2008 was published, the TC 176 committee issued a couple of binding guidance documents. Now these were related to understanding the section titled Application and also the section on outsourced processes. And these were memos 524R6 and 630R3. Now, those two papers taken together had a requirement that was found rather controversial at that time. Now, the guidance documents, for the most part, they provided various permutations on exemptions, how might something be qualified, not be qualified, what have you. But the statements that were provided in both hit on something that was considered controversial. 524R6 said the following: examples of situations where conformity to ISO 9001-2008 should not be claimed include where an organization excludes a requirement on the basis that the activity has been outsourced. 630R3 went on to say that the intent of 4.1 from ISO 9001 is to emphasize that when an organization outsources, whether permanently or temporarily, a process that affects product conformity with requirements, it cannot ignore the process, and it can't exclude it from the quality management system. So in other words, if you have something that you're excluding, exempting, because you're outsourcing it, that's not acceptable. And that goes all the way back to 2008. And that guidance has been now baked into ISO 9001-2015. Now, the obvious elephant in the room with this is design. Now, way back, we had clients who claimed an exemption on design because designs were being provided by a parent company or a sister company. Now, those exemptions potentially were not appropriate, and they definitely should not have been automatically accepted. We'll be giving some clarification on that in a couple of slides here. But there's two basic justifications for an exemption if we're talking about design and development. Either A, the auditee is receiving a complete product design from customers, or it's also possible that they don't manufacture products based on a product design at all. So if we're talking about a warehouse, a distributorship, what have you. Now, there is a third option that we're going to be exploring a little bit later in the presentation. So the obvious question from this, and we got this question from auditors and clients, and we still get this question from time to time. So you're telling me that I can't exclude it. Well, how are you going to audit something that I'm not doing? Well, the approach that we take to this is not to audit the activity itself, but to audit the outsourcing control that has been applied. So this brings us to the next topic. What is outsourcing? Well, let's begin by exploring the official definition for outsourcing. And this comes from the ISO 9000 document, that is the fundamentals and vocabulary. So outsource is defined as making an arrangement where an external organization performs part of the organization's function or process. Now, it's important to note that this is still the organization's function. It is still the organization's process. Even though it's been outsourced to somebody else, it still belongs to the certified organization. So that means you still have ownership of it, even if it isn't being done in your building. And that point is further emphasized in the note that's given right under the official definition, where it says that the external organization is outside of the scope of the management system, and that's true. We're not going to get in the car and go up the street and audit the parent company, but the outsourced function or process is within the scope. And that's kind of the key distinction here. That's why a company that gets its designs from a parent company potentially should not exclude design, because that activity is within the scope. So what are some examples of outsourced processes? Well, we've already mentioned design. There are lots of others. There are companies that outsource calibration. That's probably the most common. We see outsourcing of training very often, purchasing, manufacturing, what have you. And I've provided a clausal link for each one of these. Now, outsourcing is discussed primarily in section 8.4 of ISO 9001. And 8.4 has a very straightforward statement. It says that any externally provided processes, products, and services shall conform to requirements, that the organization shall arrange for that. Now, if you look at Annex A8 from ISO 9001, it goes on to say that all forms of externally provided processes, products, and services are addressed in 8.4, whether this is through arrangement with an associate company or outsourcing processes to an external provider. So yes, your sister companies are external providers. Your parent company is an external provider, and therefore the outsourcing requirements are in play. In ISO 9002, the guidance document, they go on to say external providers can include corporate headquarters, associate companies, suppliers, or someone to whom the organization has outsourced a process, putting it right on the nose. The Auditing Practices Group even weighed in on this. They talk about in their publication, Scope of ISO 9001, that outsourcing is to be considered an input in the development of your scope. So they've got this covered from just about every front. If you outsource an activity, it is part of your scope. Simple as that. But again, to remind you, when we audit that outsourced activity, we are auditing the appropriate controls. We're not auditing the actual activity, but only that you have appropriate control in place over the outsourced activity, the outsourced controls rather. So what do we mean by controls? Well, you think about how do you ensure that something that you've outsourced is working effectively. What form might that take? Well, that could be a purchase order. That could be email communication. It could be going to the outside provider and doing an audit. Could be requiring the outside provider to have work instructions or maintain their own ISO certification and so forth. So consider the case of a company that outsources their calibration and verification of measurement devices to an outside laboratory. What would we look at? Well, we might look at a contract that you've issued. We would certainly look at the calibration records, and we would look at any kind of gauge labeling that's been applied. Now, you'll note that none of that equivocates to a review of the actual calibration verification activity. We're not pulling the tech aside and asking all kinds of questions about how the calibration is done. Also, in this scenario, none of the applicable clauses from ISO 9001, which calibration is discussed in 7.1.5, none of those would be claimed as an exemption. Those would all be considered applicable in this scenario. Now, one of the things that we've trained our auditors to do, and therefore I want to make sure that everyone's aware of this, is we always look at a company's website as part of our audit process. Now, remember, a website is considered admissible as audit evidence. And when we look at a website, we're looking for a few things. Firstly, does it accurately reflect your scope, and is it referencing design activity, particularly for an organization that is claiming that they are not design responsible? So if we find discussion of design on your website and you've been classed as no design, well, we reach out. And the explanation that we get typically falls into one of a couple of possible camps. We may be told, well, corporate is providing the design. And we've obviously learned that that's not going to be acceptable, that you would maintain an exemption for that. Well, we don't provide design services, but we want to attract potential customers by saying that we do. Well, we understand that you have a desire to grow your business, but we can't accept that explanation either. Your website and your design classifications need to be aligned with each other. Now, on rare occasions, we've been told that, well, we did design our products, but we haven't had any design in 30 to 40 years. Now, when that comes up, that's a special situation. And we're going to look at that and take a very careful look at how we've calculated audit time. So if you are the rare client that is in that third situation, give us a call, let us know, and we will kind of work something out with you. Now, it is possible to have an exemption rooted in a limited scope. Now, most of our clients intend for everything they do to be certified, everything that's going on in the building. But we do have some situations where the client wants to have a limited scope, whether it be for financial reasons or for any other particular reason. Where that's the case, it is possible that a portion of ISO 9001 may be exempted that would not have been possible in a full scope situation. So here's an example of how that might work. Let's say that you have an organization that manufactures clothing for industrial and commercial markets. And they have two primary product lines, leather and polyester. Now, you may remember that in Section 855 of ISO 9001, there's some requirements that pertain partially to warranty provisions. So let's assume in our example here that the organization offers warranty on their polyester goods, but not on their leather goods. Well, if that company was only getting ISO 9001 certification for their leather goods, potentially they would be able to claim a full or partial exemption from Section 855. Now, these situations are typically rare, and they need to be kind of fleshed out during the audit process itself. But again, if you believe you've got something that is an example of this, let your auditors know, and it will be looked at. Now, what happens if an inappropriate item is being claimed as an exemption? Well, we've trained our auditors to write these situations up. And we've already looked at a little bit earlier in the presentation what the clause numbers were to cite in this situation. Now, if you are given a nonconformance that you don't agree with, you can always dispute it. We have a procedure, Procedure Pro 10, that's available for download anytime on our website, and that procedure will walk you through the process of filing for a dispute, and you have that right. Now, getting back to design, back in 2017, we actually rolled out a new certification option for clients who receive all or some of their product designs from a parent or affiliate company. And we gave the classification option the name Full Design Outsourced. So what full design outsourced was taken to mean was, firstly, that audit time could potentially be calculated in the same manner as for a company classified as no design. We're going to give a little clarification on that in a couple of slides here. It was also understood that a full design outsourced company could not claim an exemption for anything from the relevant design sections, and also that they had to indicate design as part of their scope statement. Now, when we rolled out this new full design outsourced classification option, we actually reached out to the ANAB. These are the folks that certify our, that they've accredited us rather to provide ISO 9001 certification services. So we try to get ANAB involved wherever we can when we make program changes like this. And at that time, ANAB basically said, okay, sounds good, but they had some comments for us to make sure that we were doing this properly. And I wanted to include some of these comments in my presentation. They said, firstly, that the complexity, activities, and risks that are present due to an outsourced provider of processes, products, or services need to be controlled or confirmed as detailed in ISO 9001:2015, Section 8.4. So in other words, we need to ensure that we're doing a careful audit of Section 8.4. They went on to say Section 8.4 has many requirements that apply to the organization, and these requirements have to be confirmed or evaluated when you are certifying an organization that claims to be outsourcing products, processes, or services. ANAB went on to indicate that they object to an automatic time reduction in regard to product design status. And they reminded us that the CB, that's PJR, has to clearly, effectively, and realistically justify and document justifications for any adjustment from the established audit day tables. In other words, we could not be expected to initially reduce audit time for a classification of full design outsourced, unless our auditor has been on site and given us assurance that the outsourcing process controls are mature, effective, and can be assessed with no added audit time. So this is where this kind of automatic time reduction and parity with no design classification was clarified. So we now have 4 classification options pertaining to design status. We're going to go ahead and go over these 4 options right now. Obviously, full design. This is any organization that is responsible for the design of at least one product that they manufacture. So if you manufacture 100 products and you design one of them, you are considered full design. And therefore, all sections of Clause 8.3 are applicable. The other extreme, of course, is no design. Now, this is any organization that receives all designs from a customer or otherwise does not interact with product designs. So companies like warehouses, staffing companies, what have you. Now, in that situation, all of Section 8.3 can be claimed as not applicable. Now, as a special note, if you are receiving product designs from parent or affiliate companies, but you don't have the responsibility for product design, and most importantly, you are not advertising or otherwise representing that you are responsible for product design, it is possible, not guaranteed, but possible that you can qualify for a no design classification. And that is a very tricky rope to cross, and it's one that we look at very carefully on the rare occasions when it comes up. We also have an option referred to as partial design. Now, this is an organization that provides technical input, review, or some other form of design service to their clients, but there is they are not responsible for final design approval. Now we have very few clients that are classified in that manner. A partial design client is going to be able to exclude some, but not all of the clauses from Section 8.3. And then lastly, we have our full design outsourced option. And as mentioned, this is an organization receiving all or some of its product designs from a parent or affiliate company or from a subcontractor, and is advertising or otherwise representing that they are responsible for product design activity. And then obviously, as was prior mentioned, you will not be excluding anything from Section 8.3 if this is how you're classified. PJR wants to ensure that our audit process is value added for our clients and addresses all applicable requirements. Making sure that exemptions are justified is an important part of that process. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We're going to be premiering our new webinar, Virtual Audits in a Post-Pandemic World. It is an overhaul of our prior virtual audit presentation. It's got a whole lot of new information. It'll be premiering in 2 days on Friday the 19th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so do tune in for that. We also have a special presentation called Your Ongoing Relationship with PJR. This is an exploration of our requirements when changes occur at your business, and it also provides a detailed explanation of the disputes process. And we've got webinars on a whole lot of other topics: process mapping, stage 1 auditing, and the various standards that we certify. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the best way for you to do that is to visit our website at www.pjr.com. Go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address, and click subscribe. You will be opted in for automatic updates on new webinars, changes to the standard, and other points of information. I do thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard and see if we have any questions today. Richard Duff asks, does a service company need to include design as they may design and develop a new service offering? Absolutely. If the service that is provided includes design of that service, if there are design aspects to it, it's certainly conceivable that design would be included. Great question. Any other questions I can answer today? Okay, very good. Thank you for your attention, and I'll hope to see some of you with us on Friday.